Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Kendle from the Thoughtful Travel podcast, and this is a presentation series on how to be a better traveller for the City of Joondalup libraries. As COVID-19 travel restrictions start to lift, it's a great time to think about how to travel more thoughtfully, and this series will help you do just that.
This presentation is about how to be a responsible traveller. Now, of course, we have to figure out really what we mean by responsible travel first. There's a few definitions here which I hope will help you think about what it means to travel responsibly. So the first one is responsible tourism minimises the negative impacts on the environment, economy and culture. It makes sense, doesn't it? We don't want to do harm or damage to a place that we visit. Although sometimes in the past when we've travelled, maybe we have. If we go somewhere that's heavily touristed and, heaven forbid, maybe we even litter or we traipse over tracks that have already been eroded. We unwittingly support, a big multinational business that doesn't give anything back to the local economy, or we, transgress against the local culture somehow just because we're perhaps not so informed. All of these things are things that probably all of us have done before. I know I have, but we don't want to do them. So that's kind of the first step to thinking about being a responsible traveller. Now, the next definition there, responsible travel is treating others the way they wish to be treated. So that goes to say a lot of things, but also to say that just because we have a certain idea about things doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right way to do things. Here's another idea. Responsible travel is being socially and culturally aware when you travel, understanding your effect on the places you visit, and trying to make that effect a positive one. That's kind of the ultimate goal, isn't it? So not only do we not want to harm or leave damage behind when we travel, but we want to leave a lasting positive impact if we can. That's the best case scenario. And finally, responsible tourism minimises negative social, economic and environmental impacts. It involves local people in decisions that affect their lives, and it's culturally sensitive, encourages respect between tourists and locals, and builds local pride and confidence. I think that kind of sums up all of those previous definitions pretty well. So, over the years, I have tried to learn and do better and become a more responsible traveller, and I thought I'd share a few of the ways that I've tried to do this in recent times to give you some ideas of how we can try and travel more responsibly. So, this picture here, that's my son, and he's got standing with his rental bike outside the kiosk where we rented them in Copenhagen in Denmark from a little business called Bicykelly. So I knew we wanted to ride bikes around Copenhagen for lots of reasons, and I of course Googled it before we got there to figure out where we were going to rent them from. And there's heaps and heaps of choices. Copenhagen is a fabulous city for cyclists. There's lots of places you could rent bikes from. So I had a look through a few, and then I found these guys at Bicykelly who were not only they had decent bikes at a reasonable rate, because that was still important for me, but they were also a very a responsible business with a big social conscience. So part of their business model is that they also support a bike workshop down in Mozambique, and they do this in various ways. They send bikes and bike parts down there. They even send their staff down periodically to train locals in Mozambique to be bike mechanics, so that they're then running their own business there, and they generally support it in lots of different ways. And I thought that was a good example of a nice, responsible, socially conscious business, and I was really happy to support them. And so I chose to spend my bicycle rental dollars in their direction rather than someone else. Here's a closer to home example of being respectful of also the local wildlife, which is a really important part of being a responsible traveller as well. So we'll hear later from Ben from World Animal Protection with some more information about responsible wildlife tourism. But this example was me last year in Cairns in Queensland. And I got to visit Fitzroy Island, which I highly recommend. Beautiful part of the world. And while I was on Fitzroy Island, I was able to visit the Cairns Turtle Rehabilitation Centre. And I, got to learn all about their work, and they're doing fabulous work there, rehabilitating turtles that have suffered various illness and injury. Sadly, a lot of it due to human intervention, but they are now recovering there, and then as they recover, they get released back into the sea. And it was great to see their good work there. Another way to be a responsible traveller is simply to try and support local businesses, often small local businesses, rather than, big multinationals. Stay in a small locally owned hotel rather than, a big chain hotel that we all those brands that we know so well. Here's just a couple of examples. The place on the left is a little locally owned cafe I visited recently in Joondalup in the southwest. It's called Goanna Cafe. I highly recommend it. And they didn't pay me to say this. They don't even know who I was. But I really loved that spot. And on the right, you can see back in Copenhagen as well, I wanted to take a canal tour. And there's lots of, different kinds of canal tours. But this was a really special, small local business called Hey Captain. You could tell a lot about the business and the story and the owners and the staff from their website. Got to get a really good feel for it. And I thought that's where I'm going to spend my canal cruising dollars. And finally, also being a responsible traveller means fitting in culturally, learning about the local customs and, respecting them. So you can see on the left there, that's my son in Fiji, and he's being taught how to wear his sulu properly as a mark of local respect. And on the right is my son and I, that's my fingers and my chopsticks, on a trip to Japan. Now, of course, I lived in Japan for a couple of years and I completely mastered the art of using chopsticks, but my son, without even much prompting from me, decided long before we went to Japan that he wanted to be able to eat everything there with chopsticks as well. And so we practiced at home for a long time before we actually went to Japan. And once we were there, as you see, he at 7 or 8 was already pretty adept at using chopsticks. And it was quite sweet because the people in the restaurants would often come up as soon as we sat down and bring him a special knife and fork or a spoon and a fork. And he'd say, "No thanks, I can use chopsticks." And I was really kind of proud, I have to say. So, another important attempt to respect the local culture. So it's also really important to recognise what we don't know and to try and find ways to learn about being a responsible traveller from others. Now, one area which I think we don't know enough about often and is really important to know is about child-safe tourism. And I spoke with Brett from Social Cycles about a particular aspect of child-safe tourism that I think is important, and it's about orphanage tourism.
So what orphanage tourism actually is, it turns out quite a lot of studies have shown that there's, unfortunately, they predict there's about 80% of orphans in Cambodia and across the world really have at least one living relative.
80%, did you say?
80%,
Whoa.
yeah. UNICEF sort of studies suggest that it's up to 80%. So there's a lot more orphanages now in Cambodia today than there was 20 years ago. And the country's in a much more stable state. And there's been no natural disasters and no wars to speak of, yet the volume, the quantity of orphanages has risen dramatically, and therefore obviously the children in these orphanages has risen dramatically. So what's happened in the last 20 years? And if you look back, the amount of tourists have increased and they've come over. And unfortunately, what's happened is that the orphanage model has almost turned into a business model. And, so to put it sort of quite simply, there's been one orphanage there and some tourists have gone and they've helped and they've raised money and all this sort of thing. And that's great. And the orphanage owner has taken all this money and has done sort of quite well with it. And then someone else, like another local, has sort of looked around and said, "Geez, you seem to be doing well. What are you doing for a living?" It's like, "Well, I run an orphanage and all these people give me money." And so then that person's gone, "Well, geez, that's a good idea. I better go and start my own orphanage." So what that does is it turns the children almost into a commodity. So then that person needs to go out and find children. Therefore, they go out to the rural areas and they find the poorest kind of families and they say, "You've got 5 children, give me 2 of them. I will sort of," it's almost like a cell in I'll put them through schooling, I'll find them jobs, this, that and the other, and, and they'll be fed and all this, and I'll help them, and then you can use your, family income to sort of look after the other 2 or 3 or whatever it may be. So it's a really difficult decision for these families to do, and they're not sort of giving them away, but there's a lot of false promises that are coming, and so then what happens is, so there's a bunch of children, and then obviously the tourists are coming and they're volunteering and they're raising money to help this orphanage and whatnot. But completely ignorant and unaware that these children have families. So there's just a spiral of like short-term volunteers coming in and teaching this, like teaching English. So okay, so let's do ABCs and all this sort of thing. And then next week, a different tourist will come in and go, okay, what are we going to do? All right, let's teach ABCs. And there's just a repetition of ABCs and really sort of no curriculum or anything like that, because that's not what's so important. The important is that the donations keep coming in.
Another aspect of responsible travel that I think it's important we learn more about is how to be an ethical wildlife tourist. There's so many animal attractions around the world, and we want to make sure that we're visiting them responsibly and avoiding those that, well, we should be avoiding. I chatted with Ben from World Animal Protection about some of the issues in responsible wildlife tourism.
Wild animal tourism actually makes up a very big segment of overall tourism. A large segment of it is actually driven by people wanting to have an experience with a wild animal. Now, as you say, I think the message has very much got through in a country like this that riding elephants is not okay, and that's good. That's really good. But, that's not the only thing that causes cruelty. And really, at the heart of wild animal tourism, inappropriate and cruel wild animal tourism, is the problem that a lot of the cruelty actually happens behind the scenes. So you then have this paradox where people who love animals and go to see these animals are actually contributing to cruelty and to those animals suffering. So what to look out for? So take riding elephants. Great. As I said, I think people have generally got the message now. Don't ride an elephant. But the reason we don't want you to ride an elephant in particular is because the training process needed to get that elephant to a point where it will be consent to being ridden by a human is just utterly barbaric. It's essentially a process in which their spirit is broken, they are brutalized, they are in fear of the mahout, the trainer who oversees them. The problem we have is that some people then say, okay, I won't do that, but what I will do is I will go and wash an elephant or bathe it or jump in a river stream with it. Now, the concern we have there is in many cases, again, that's still a wild elephant that generally wouldn't be happy to share a pool with a human being or be in such close contact with them. And those animals, in many cases, have also gone through that process. They may have stopped riding them and now got them to do this, but you've still got animals that have gone through that process. And in particular, and it comes back to the point I made about the quokkas, it still kind of sends the message that that's what wild animals are for. They're a sort of an entertainment prop. So you jump in the water, you wash them, you engage with them, but it's all about you, if you know what I mean. It's not about that animal. I mean, these are wild animals and they belong in the wild. They don't want to be in contact with you. They're not domesticated. And when you go to a venue which offers you something like that, offers you an experience of the wild animal in which they're behaving in a way that they wouldn't be, we urge you not to do it. And in most cases, because you can pretty much be guaranteed that the animal has been treated very badly to get it to the point where it consents to that kind of behaviour. And then also, of course, there are all the associated issues. I mean, particularly when we think about the way in which animals are kept. For example, we did a report on Bali a couple of years ago, and our undercover researchers came out and said, look, the animals are chained every night on short chains. They're on concrete. The enclosures are absolutely tiny.
So I hope that all of that information gives you some more ideas about how you too can be a more responsible traveller. Here are my 3 biggest tips, and I hope that they prove useful to you when you're planning your future travels. First of all, do the research before and during your trip. Often it's just a matter of a quick Google to find out, okay, this place is, more appropriate for my spending than another. It might be a quick Google search to discover that, there's a local business, locally owned, versus a big multinational or whatever. Lots of different things you can do. And because it's becoming a more important issue these days, it's not hard to find some research. Might be a blog post or some reviews on a TripAdvisor or some similar forum where you can find out a bit more information and decide, is this a responsible choice? Also, while you're on your trip, ask some more questions. You might be wanting to, say, book a quick day trip somewhere and you're there in the offices of some tour companies. You can ask them, how are your guides trained? How are they, remunerated? Is this, respectful? Who owns this business? Where are my dollars going to end up? That kind of thing. You can ask politely, and a good business will be really happy to show and share with you that they are a responsible business. And basically, just whenever you have the choice, make a responsible choice. Consider local businesses, ethical businesses, socially conscious businesses, and although none of us can get it right all the time, I think that if we're trying and doing a bit of research and asking around, we can make a lot of difference. And the more of us who do it, the more that tour operators and other operators in the travel market will realise that we want to be more responsible travellers. So I hope that helps, and enjoy being a responsible traveller on your next trip. Thanks so much for watching.